Chapter 3. The new school year finally started, and the smell of clean hallways, new pencils, and paper filled the air. The Peascoober boys were excited but also very nervous. "Here we are, the new kids at the institution," said Paul, as they unloaded off the bus. He wondered how Aubrey's first day back at the Flatlands was going. Thankfully, the school was a square shape, so it made it hard for them to get too lost finding their classrooms. "Good luck," said Paul, as he slapped the backpack of his brother on his way to find his classroom. The first warning bell had rung and most of the kids had found their way to their homerooms. Paul stepped into the class to see that the room wasn't as stale as he had imagined. It was then he saw Wendy. There was a seat next to her that wasn't filled yet. Paul was hoping that it was vacant for him. He went to sit down, but saw that the desk had names already on them just like at his old school. The empty desk was for L. Hurley. He sighed to himself. "Good morning," she said with a smile. Hi," he said back as he felt his heart start to race. "I think I saw your name on one of the desks near the front." "Thanks. I must have overlooked it," said Paul, grinning. "The front row, really?" Paul said to himself. Paul found his seat next to Hamilton Parks in the front row. He saw a girl with her nose in a book reading as she walked into the room. She walked right over to the desk labeled L. Hurley and sat down. "Hi, London," said Wendy. How did she not run into anything, thought Paul. Their teacher had passed out the daily schedule for their school week. Because everything was so new, time seemed to be flying by. Paul didn't mind. While his teacher was talking, Paul looked at the schedule and saw that lunch was next. He looked over, and Hamilton started to rub his stomach, showing he was hungry. In fact, Paul saw Hamilton sneak some cheese puffs from his own lunch during class. Paul wasn't going to say anything. More power to him if it helps him get through this day, Paul thought. Paul and Patty didn't mind school. They both had their passion for certain subjects and hated others. There was one time of the day they absolutely loved. Recess, you say? Oh no, it wasn't recess as much as they enjoyed it. It was the lunch hour that the Peascoober boys looked forward to. Back at their old school in the Flatlands, Paul and Patty could eat together since they were only one grade apart. This made for great storytelling and laughing at jokes that only their friends would understand. Paul could only hope it would be the same here. The new kid, he kept saying to himself. It brought so much anxiety. Adults just wouldn't understand. The bell rang and the class quickly got ready to head to the lunchroom. Mrs. Peascoober packed the boys' lunches that day, so Paul grabbed his lunchbox out of his book bag. The teacher dismissed the class to go have their lunch. In the hallway, Hamilton was already eating his sandwich. He asked Paul if he would like to sit together in the lunchroom. "Sure. Thanks, Hamilton," said Paul.
"Hey man, I know what it's like being the new kid. It's really hard. You have to make all new friends, and you don't know if your clothes are cool, or if you have a good haircut, or if your shoes are tight."
The way he said the word tight made Paul think it wasn't what the word really meant.
"I was the new kid a couple years ago. Moved from the Northwest. Let's just say I didn't fit in right away,"
said Hamilton. Paul hadn't given much thought to his clothes, hair, or shoes. Well, that he knew of. But all of what Hamilton was saying was true. Deep down, there was a subconscious conflict happening, and Paul's confidence was not as strong as it once was. He was sure that his shoes were tight, as he had pumped his shoes to the perfect fit. But maybe his shoes weren't tight, as Hamilton described. This started to make Paul self-conscious. Paul was glad to see Paddock come in the lunchroom, and noticed that he was walking with Charlie Crocker, Wendy's brother. They made their way to the same table. Maybe there will be some things that stay the same. This gave Paul hope. The school week was moving along, and they were all ready to Wednesday. It was lunchtime again, and every lunch hour there would be a long line for hot lunch. If you packed your own lunch, also known as brown bagging it, you just quickly found your place to sit down. It was a squatter's rights, first come first served kind of deal. There always seems to be favorite spots that groups of kids will go. The older grades would overtake the back corners of the room, and you didn't dare try to sit there as they would kick you out. Everyone else just filled in the gaps, and you felt sorry for the last person in line as they had to squeeze into any remaining spot that the lunch tray could fit. Mrs. Peascoober had planned to send leftover salmon patties with the boys for lunch, but she had burnt them, and Paul and Patty said that they would rather go without lunch than eat those again. So they got lunch money instead. They stood in a long, slow-moving line of students. As they got closer to the food, they could smell the aroma filling the air, but wasn't sure what the menu was. Finally, Paul spotted the main course. Pizza. Yes, Paul said to himself. Pizza in the shape of a rectangle? I've never seen that before. He slowly went through the line, taking the pizza and sliding it into the largest rectangle on the tray. Weird enough, it was like they made the food to fit the tray, or the tray to fit the food. It would have been a debate much like, did the chicken come before the egg, or vice versa? The lunch lady said, would you like some applesauce? Yes please, said Paul. And how about some peas, dear? Paul stood for a moment. Peas and pizza? Who made this menu? Realizing he was holding up the line, he finally answered and said yes to the peas. The lunch lady took a large spoonful and filled up a whole section on his lunch tray. Thankfully, the last station was a chocolate chip cookie and a carton of chocolate milk. Paul and Patty found the rest of their friends at one of the folding tables and sat down. Whoa, Paul, that is a lot of peas, said Patty. Yeah, said Paul sheepishly, not knowing what to think of the mountain of green balls on his tray. Patty quickly found that rolling up the rectangle pizza like a carpet made it easy to eat. Soon, all the boys followed along and were making pizza carpet rolls and shoving them in their mouths. The clock on the wall was showing 12:15, and that meant they had 15 minutes before leaving for class. Paul looked across the cafeteria and saw Wendy sitting with some other girls. She looked back at Paul, smiled, and then held up her plastic spoon. She started to motion as if she was going to use it as a catapult and fling something toward Paul. Wendy pointed to the green vegetables on her tray, and Paul quickly knew what she meant. Loading up his spoonful of peas, Paul and Wendy were about to start something that was going to change the course of the school's history. They counted to 3 and pulled back their spoons. 1, 2, 3, and let a flurry of green peas fly through the air across the cafeteria. The kids didn't know what had hit them. The peas landed in ears and splatted on eyeglasses of other kids. Not knowing who started it, that didn't matter anymore because an epic food fight had started, and it was raining green peas everywhere you looked, splatting doors and hitting anyone who dared step foot in the lunchroom. The cooks and monitors stood wide-eyed with disbelief, and their mouths hanging open. A stray pea landed in the mouth of one of the cooks, causing them to cough up the pea and shoot it back out into the lunchroom. In all the commotion, you could hear a kid yell, "Bullseye!" The school staff tried to get things back under control, but found that taking shelter under an umbrella was a lot easier. Finally, 12:30 came and the bell rang. You had never seen the kids move so fast trying to get back to their classes. Everyone quickly made their way out of the cafeteria, all but Paul. You see, one of the lunch monitors had seen Paul, and only Paul, fling the first of the peas. Paul had to sit at the table till everyone was gone. The silence in the room was deafening. You could hear the hundreds of wet peas slowly rolling down the walls and then breaking free to fall to the floor with loud splats, like when you hear the end of a rainstorm and things are still dripping, except it was green, mushy vegetables. "Paul Peascoober? Come with me to the office at once," said the lunch monitor. Paul couldn't help but smile because he knew that he and Wendy created quite the lunch memory that day. This one is for the books, he thought to himself, but then started to remember he was the new kid in school. My parents are going to kill me when they find out, he thought. The principal's door opened, and Mr. Clapp asked Paul to come in. Paul sat down and was now getting very nervous about what he had done. Mr. Clapp, in a calm and intrigued voice, started talking to Paul. "Mr. Peascoober, how is your first week of school going so far? I know that you came from the Flatlands. That is a long distance from here, isn't it? Are you settling in?" Paul didn't want to answer. He had no choice but to settle in. Why would anyone ask that question of a kid? He got no say in moving. Resilient, adults would say. Kids are resilient and will be just fine. Yeah, right. They don't get what we had to leave behind to come here and start all over because his dad took a new job. He found himself saying what he thought Mr. Clapp would want to hear. Yeah, I guess. Paul's answer must have been persuading enough to Mr. Clapp as he moved to the topic that got Paul in the hot seat. "Mr. Peascoober, it is my understanding that you started quite a food fight today. Let me ask you something. Do peas fly very well? How many peas stuck to the walls? Did you find that shooting a spoonful was better than launching one at a time?" Paul couldn't believe what he was hearing. There wasn't a scolding or anything that suggested he might be in trouble coming from Mr. Clapp. No, instead it was all inquisitive. Mr. Clapp was looking at the situation as one of science and learning. This is not what Paul expected. He found his face starting to relax and even start to crack a bit of a smile. He found the courage to speak. "Well, Mr. Clapp, I did find shooting multiple peas much harder to get across the room as they were heavier, but it also depended on how far back I bent my spoon." "Ah, I see. Very good then," said Mr. Clapp. Brilliant, just brilliant. Paul had a principal that didn't mind him goofing off. This was too good to be true. Getting hopeful that he would not have any consequence for what he did, he said, "So that's it? I'm not in trouble?" "Oh yes, you are definitely in trouble for starting a food fight. Here at the school, we want everyone to be a good example. I see something great in you, Paul Peascoober, but remember, we must find a way to put our enthusiasm and energy into something productive for not only ourselves, but the others around us. You are to help clean up the cafeteria for the rest of the week. Mr. Peascoober, I hope that I can trust that you will not do this again. I do have an idea, though, that I think will benefit everyone and have a little fun as well. You are dismissed to go back to class." Not feeling very good that he had to help clean the cafeteria, but glad that his punishment wasn't something worse, Paul made his way back to the class and found his seat. The kids were still talking about how awesome lunch was that day. The clock was about ready to hit 2:50 when over the loudspeaker, the principal, Mr. Clapp, made an announcement.
"Class, before we dismiss today, I want to let you all know that we're going to start an annual food flying competition. Each grade will create their own food flinger to see how far they can make the food fly. Today we had a great example of this with peas and how they can be very aerodynamic. The class in each grade that comes up with the best design and performing flinger will win a field trip to the Hands-On Science Museum at the end of the school year. This competition will be held outside to help our custodial team from having to clean up the mess. Another valuable lesson learned today. Be talking to your class about your ideas and collectively make a plan that will best represent your creativity. Happy science and have a great day!"
Just then, the bell rang and class was dismissed. The halls were buzzing about the food flinging competition between grades. That day marked Paul Peascoober becoming known as Paul the Pea Shooter for the rest of the school year.